clear directions. Much appreciated. All right, good. Garrett, is that working for you?
It's working. I think we're recording. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And that, if you're recording, then let's go ahead and get started.
Great. It's going to go straight to my computer and I'll just upload it on Brightspace.
Okay,
I'll probably do
fine.
another YouTube link and then put it in Brightspace.
All right. And we're also gaining people by the second. So let me welcome people as you're joining. You are very welcome. This is the study guide review for the New Testament exam that will happen on Saturday, May 8th, God willing, from, did we check the time, Garrett? Is it 9:30 or 9?
I'll do that right now.
Okay, that'd be great. It would be good for people to know when to take the exam. 3 hours, but my guesstimate is that most of you won't need the 3 hours. You have it, but you don't need it. But that is, you don't need it if you've had time to think through the questions in advance that I gave you, and to jot some notes or an outline, or if you're totally paranoid, a whole essay, but I wouldn't think you would have to do that. Right.
Dr. Grebe, it is Saturday, May 8th from 9:30 to 12:30. 9:30
to 12:30. Good. Okay. And that's fine. We're going to do this by email. We've learned about Brightspace. So what that means is that Garrett, I can't remember, are you here or not that day?
I'll be on campus.
Okay, fine. In that case, I will get you to upload the exam at 9:30. I'll send it to you in advance and ask you to upload it to everybody's email at 9:30.
Okay.
And then when you're done, just get it in, send it back to I guess to me by email. And if you're a little over 12:30, I'm not gonna stop the game. So if
Dr. Grebe, will it be a PDF or a Word document that you're sending to me?
I think it's going to be a PDF. I think everything that goes from a photocopier is a PDF.
Okay, so folks will have to scan it and send it back in then.
That's right.
Okay.
It did for the 2 exams in the fall.
Okay.
Well, actually, at the second exam, we learned from the first exam was the disaster exam. I never ever want to see in my whole life. That was so bad. Okay, so we live and learn. Okay.
Kay, did you have a concern?
I don't have the capability to scan on a weekend. I can on a weekday, but I cannot on a weekend.
All right.
I mean, I could go to Kinko's, I suppose.
You could, Kay,
I can do that.
Kay, you could possibly just take a picture and send it in if that.
That's fine with me. It's readable.
Oh. Maybe. Okay, I'll see. Thanks.
Okay.
Whatever seems to work.
Thanks,
If a
Garrett.
picture is legible, fine.
People did that before and it worked.
Okay.
In fact, I preached a whole sermon that way once. I was stranded
I heard this story.
to Mississippi. I was in an airport. I borrowed a phone, took a picture, put the 4 pages of my sermon on the floor, photocopied them, sent them to the bishop, and somebody else preached the sermon for me. That has to be one of the weirdest sermon experiences I've ever had. So I know it can be done, and we'll work with you, Kay. Okay. All right. Can you make a Word doc of the answers? Yes, I think so. Can I make a Word doc? Is that what are you asking, Timothy?
So Kay, you can just answer the questions in a Word document and then send it to her.
Yes, that's possible. For the ones that are, for the things that are just fill in the blank, or just put the numbers and your answer, and that's fine. Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Timothy. Again, thanks.
I'll follow up with you, Kay. I'll give you a call tomorrow. We'll talk.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. It takes a village, and we're in good shape here. Okay, good. By the way, in case I forget it, today is a Star Wars Day, so maybe the opening prayer should be, "May the 4th be with you." Do know that we're rooting for you all the way here. Okay, the floor is now open for your questions. Rosanna,
So a logistics question, will we have any choice between questions and the mini essays? How will that work?
there will be a limited choice. That is, I will give you a choice. I know I'll give you a choice among the 7. I may choose the final, the one of the questions at the one of the last 3 questions and just foist it on you and require you to answer it. But there will be some choice.
Can I ask into the substantive question?
Sure.
If we're done with the practical ones, yeah.
Are also welcome.
Okay. All right. It's the difference between, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Amphibalomena and Antilegomena. I've seen some of the same books listed in both of those. Is there a specific, like this book is in this category and this book is in this, or is it more like in the, is there like a difference of opinion on things like 2nd Peter or 2nd and 3rd John? Because I've seen them both listed in either category.
Okay, I promise you that I will not ask you the question of which books did Origen put in which category. That should help for a start. That's
Okay.
Not interested in that at all. In remembering that, I can't remember it myself. I have to look them up. What I'm interested in is in how Origen thought about it. And how he thought about it was that there were books that everyone agreed should be in the canon. There were books that were spoken against. That is that some did not think they should be in the canon, or some people at least. And then there were some that were considered toss-ups. People couldn't decide whether or not they should be in the canon, or the group was split, or people didn't care one way or the other, whether they were in the canon. It's hard to know what the words mean now without reading Origen very carefully, and we're not doing that right now. So I mean, that sometime when you have great interest in the formation of the canon later and you want to translate Origen, go for it. But this is what I want, is you to understand the process of the canon formation, to remember that Origen was one of the key players, and to know what the words mean, so that you can muse if necessary on the formation of the canon. The point is that it was a messy process. It was a long process, and that it took centuries. And the reason that I keep insisting on this and saying it ad nauseum is because you will find people who said, why should we follow a canon that was decided in one convention by a bunch of dead white guy bishops in 451 or something, and they won't understand that that's not how it worked at all. So I want you to have a couple of different historical points in your head where things were moving towards a canon, and then to understand that it was different in the East and the West when we finally got a canon. The question about the Old Testament canon, which, I mean, of course, the New Testament, the question about whether the Old Testament canon was closed, and when. So I just want you to appreciate the complexity of the question. And I thought talking about Origen's terms would help that. That's my goal.
Okay, great.
So I'm not interested in your ability to list which books were in, which books Origen thought were in which group.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I'm sure there are other good questions behind it. Please feel free. It's important sometimes to know why something is important to your instructor. Not just, all things are not equally important in any course you take. And so it's always worthwhile to say, not the is this gonna be on the final exam question, which we all hate? But it says, because it translates in our limited minds as, do I have to learn this? You know, which is probably not what you mean. It's the practical versus the theoretical again. And I get that. I've been a student. I understand that you want to limit your liability. But the point is to focus on the things that are worth studying and to learn them. So that you'll be able, in a parish situation that you cannot at this point foresee, but that I can promise you will happen sometime, you will use what you're learning here. There will be somebody who's worried about which books are in the New Testament and why, and whether the process was okay or whether it was flawed, and whether we should be throwing the whole thing out, whether we should have a canon at all. And so you're going to need to have something to say about that.
Dr. Grebe, is the Eastern Church still vastly different? And do they view the incorporation of the canon? I know you had mentioned in the lecture that, you know, it went on for another 400 years or so after the Western.
Right. So I think both Hebrews, so if I'm remembering my own notes right, both Hebrews and Revelation were considered dicey in the Eastern Church. Remember, one of the things that's importantly different about the Eastern churches is that they're autocephalous. That's another 50-cent word. It means that they're headed, cephalus is head, self-headed, each church. So the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Syrian Orthodox Church, the Cyprian, Cyprus or Cyprian, I guess it's right, Orthodox Church, the Egyptian, the Orthodox Church, Coptic Orthodox Church, are all going to have slightly different rulings on this. So that makes it very hard to get to talk about the Eastern Church as a unit. Not true in the Roman Catholic Church. You know exactly what it is because you've got a pope and a magisterium. Protestantism is more complicated because some denominations have things like general conventions and some don't. In some of these very important denominations, each parish is autocephalous, like Baptists. It's just really different. Hard then to talk about the church as a whole and have only one thing to say about the canon. But you're on the right track there. Everything else is clear.
So you mentioned knowing what the professor wants. You mentioned that there's going to be a different weighting for the mini essays on the New Testament versus the Pauline essays. Would you mind sharing what the weighting is going to be in the 1, 2, 3, and 4 brackets?
I didn't do that. I thought I
didn't
had.
see it.
Maybe I didn't. Sorry, I don't see it either. I really meant to do that. So yes, absolutely. And this is just what you've seen in earlier exams, and that is that I think I usually try to come up with 20, and they're each worth a point or a point and a half for the fill in the blank. Sometimes I can only come up with 10 or 15, and so they don't count as much, the objective questions. So the essays are where you want to put your energy. I don't think I have an exact weighting. They'll be roughly comparable. So I should have an old exam in front of me, but I don't. Let me just do some quick calculating for a minute. Let's take another question and I'll come back to you, and then we'll say.
You could just put the old exam up to the screen and we could.
No, I don't have it with me. I'm in a different place than my old exams are. Oh, you mean the whole exam? Is that what you said? Just hold it up. Yeah, share the document. I'm not sure I know how to do that, Tim. You funny guy. Okay. Yeah, all right. So let's just say the first one is going to be 20 answers and probably, okay. The second one probably going to be either 10 or 15. Fill in the blanks. I can't remember. You do remember that the you're going to have to list the uncontested letters of Paul. I think I've said that a million times, but I'll say it 1,000,001 times just to make sure. All right. The quotations. I said, I really have 5 parts here, don't I? Yeah, so there's going to be there's going to be, and it's going to really be 5 parts. So that I guess I thought the identification of names and fill in the blank, I thought of them as one thing. But they're 2 things. I'll have probably one of each kind. And they're probably, let's just say they're each 20 points. I'll make that work. And then the quotations part, how does that work? We need to add up to 100. So let's just do 20 for everything. Let's just do that. So to each part, there are there'll be the identification that gives more weight to the things I said were less important. So let's not do that. Okay, I'll just go ahead and do that. It's easier for all of us. And it slightly weights the objective side, which is in your favor. So let's go ahead and do that. So it's 5 parts. One will be identification, like a matching. One will be fill in the blank. One will be identification of quotations. One will be mini essays about Paul, and the other will be mini essays about New Testament theology. Each section will be worth 20 points. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Can I ask a question about the ID of quotations?
Yeah.
Okay, so with this section, we're just coming up with the citation and then a sentence or two about the significance, or are we writing a paragraph, or what's the kind of what are you visualizing here? Because in the midterm or the final in the fall, we had to write longer on the citations.
The citations will be about a sentence or 2 in length.
Okay.
You're going to identify the quotation, from which book it is and where it is found. You're gonna, that's easy because it's normally, this would all be closed everything in a classroom, but we can't do that. So you just look it up, just find it. That should take 2 seconds somewhere on a online concordance. Right? Am I right about that? That's not going to take any time.
Yep.
And then so the actual the part that's serious is the how or why it is significant within that text. And you want just a couple of sentences. Remember that I clarified this after one or either the first or second exam. I gave you model answers and people said that's more than 2 or 3 sentences. And I said, right, I don't expect you to make all the points that I made in them, but if you made some of them, if you just made 1 point, that's not as helpful as if you can say 2 or 3 things, but you can actually say quite a few things in 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. I don't know how much you'll need. But the point is to say what you can say briefly about that quotation.
And we're answering probably like 8 or 10 of those.
No, probably not that many.
Oh, okay. All right.
On the essays, so it keeps, so I'm not clear on the study guide that you gave us. You told us that the Paul essay questions should be 500 to 1500 words. And then the three, I'm going to say more canon oriented questions. Also, it says 500 to 1500 words. So are those all intended to be same length? Because I keep hearing the Paul as being shorter essays, but the way it is on the study guide, they're all the same.
I think they'll be easier essays. They
Okay.
both are mini essays. I just think that
Okay,
for the Paul ones, you just need, for look at A, where does Paul talk about baptism? If you know the answer to that, then you're going to be able to go there and in a few words, say something about Paul's understanding about baptism, right? Same thing with the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. Oh, that's a little bit different. I asked if any of it was useful for the church today. So you have to, hopefully you will find something in 1 Corinthians 11 that is useful for the church today. If your answer is, if I ask you that question and you just say no, that probably won't get you a very good grade. So, or if you just say yes, that probably won't get you a very good grade either. So, use your good brains, right? I
What
do,
if we say yes with confidence?
yeah, yes, with an exclamation point. Right? No, I don't think that would help. I actually want thinking. I want an intelligent, informed response.
So if we say it in Greek,
I'm greedy that way. No, I don't think that would help you either.
How about yes, C. Brown?
Unless, of course, it's perfect Greek. Okay.
you're on.
Are there questions about the questions themselves?
I had a question with the with F, what is the significance of the historical Jesus for Paul? So I guess my question here is advice would be, as I was kind of working on this one, I kept finding myself getting drawn back into the first semester debates over historical Jesus.
Yes.
And is that sort of like a dangerous road to trod, or is that the right direction?
Well, remember that the Gospels are written later than Paul. So the question about the historical Jesus and Paul is one we did talk about. It's discussed in Lee Keck. I don't know whether you could find it in an index under historical Jesus. You might be able to. Certainly in Keck's book on Jesus, who is Jesus, I'm sure there would be something in the index there about Paul. That would be a good place to look. But there are on almost any book on Paul. So Raymond Brown is going to weigh in on that. It shouldn't be hard to find that Paul didn't say a whole lot about the historical Jesus. And to notice, I pointed out some of the quotations that might come from Jesus. Sometimes Paul flags them. Sometimes he just says things that say, didn't good old what's his name say that? So you have there's the quotation thing, but I'm more interested in your observing that Paul doesn't give us a gospel. Paul doesn't give us the things that we find in a gospel. He gives us something else that for him is much more important.
Dr. Grebe, I have a question. Whether it's in our mini essays, well, I guess that would be the only spot. Do you need us to do a specific type of referencing if we found, like if we were pulling it from one of the readings or such? How do you want us to handle
Yeah, no,
citing?
thank you for that question. This is not a paper, although I can see how you could begin to think this is a whole lot of papers. It doesn't have to be that though. This is an exam, and the rules are different for an exam. In papers, we fuss and fret over making sure that you're giving credit to your sources. In an exam, that's not usually the expectation. But if you're going to engage somebody or quote somebody I mean, obviously, if you quote somebody, you'd want to just say from Brown, this is from Brown says. And you could, since you've got it in front of you, you might put a page number, but the rules are really much laxer in an exam. That's not much of an answer, but at least it sort of gives you the direction to think about it.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Grebe, I wanted to ask about one of the terminology terms.
Yep.
The doctrine of the two ways. I couldn't find too much about it in my notes. I looked it up online. It's big with the Mormons, but I don't think that's where it's going.
No, the place we talked about it most was in the Didache. But you need to know, and if you read Lou Martin's essay on Galatians, you might have come across it as well, because Lou Martin argues that the teachers have take seriously. The doctrine of the two ways is biblical. It comes from the end of Deuteronomy, one of the places Moses says there are two ways, the way of life and the way of death. Choose life that you and your descendants may live. And he helps you choose life by outlining a whole lot of things that you should do, and then outlining a whole lot of things that you shouldn't do. One is the way of life, one is the way of death. Hint, following the commandments of God and is it going to help be the way of life? Following other gods, things like that. So these are not, these are designed to be a simple teaching tool for people to remember. Two ways, good way, bad way, way of life, way of death. And you see the same thing in the beginning of the Didache. They have picked up on this, this tradition, this biblical tradition. And the Didache actually begins with a study of the two ways. But I put it in there because sometimes people confuse it with the idea of the two ages. There are two, so and that's very different. The doctrine of the two ages is an apocalyptic idea that the present evil age, to quote Paul in Galatians, is passing away, and the age to come has come, or at least has started to come, because of the resurrection, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So those need to be kept separate. One is teaching material, and the other is paradosus, or what's the other word that I wanted to find for you here? You've run into that. Well, paradosus will do. It's teaching material that is comes out. It's sort of out of a wisdom tradition, but you can't limit it to the wisdom tradition. But it's a style of teaching that you can see how useful it would be for people to remember. Right way, wrong way.
Thanks.
When I was growing up, we had there was a journal called I can't remember, highlights for children, something like that. Highlights for children. Yeah, maybe it's still around. Maybe it's probably not anymore. Okay. And there were two characters. One was Goofus and the other one was
Gallant.
Gallant and Goofus. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Okay. And Gallant was your role model, and Goofus was the guy you didn't want to be. And it was moral teachings about how children should behave. And that's what I think of when I think of the doctrine of the two ways, which may or may not help you. All right. I haven't thought about that in years. Okay, next question.
Dr. Grebe, would another way to approach that be picking up on the thing with Galatians, the not under law but under grace, Hagar and Sarah, or is that going too far afield?
What are you connecting it to? The two
To the
ways?
doctrine of two ways, yeah.
Not really.
Okay, thanks.
If I were to say more about Lou Martin's use of it in terms of the teachers, I would say something like you have you can either follow the law of Israel and then you're a real Christian, or you can flunk it by not following the law of Israel. So you need to get yourself circumcised, guys, and you need to do the food laws, and you need to not eat with Gentiles in Antioch, guys. The Antioch showdown is really the place where, and I warned where you see it, and I warned you about any definition of Christianity that says you need to trust in what God has done in Jesus Christ, plus you need to do something else, plus tithe, plus speak in tongues, plus do works of mercy. It's the extra thing that gets added that messes up the equation. We've actually covered quite a bit of material, haven't we, this year, in spite of COVID?
Dr. Grebe, what's your Paul story? What got you so interested in Paul?
If there really is a gap, I'm happy to tell you more about that. I hated Paul in college. I never had actually read Paul because I didn't have to. I already knew I hated his guts. So, but then something happened and I actually started reading Paul. It was shocking. I really liked it. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry about my phone. It'll go away in a minute. So that's why I'm so sympathetic to people who start out hating Paul. Because there's so much bad press about Paul.
So what you're saying is there is some hope for us. We're still wrestling with Paul.
I'm not saying that you'll grow out of it into a love of Paul. That would be really arrogant. We've had enough colonialism in the world that you don't need to hear. Well, at one of these days you'll figure out that I'm right and you're wrong. That's not really what I want to say. If it sounded like that, I recant. No. But what I am saying is that he's worth wrestling with, and what I said at the very beginning, be careful because he's a pretty good arguer, and you might just end up being him. Yeah. So.
Dr. Grebe, may I ask specific questions about the two amazing A words, amphibolomena and antilegomena? Right.
Amphi, you can relate to amphibian.
Right.
Okay, so it can
Got that.
it can go in one of either two piles. Balo means to throw. Amphi, you could toss it either way. They're the toss-ups. They could either go in the pile of books, make it into the canon, or they could
Yes.
pile of books that we don't want in the canon.
Yes.
And people are divided about this. So amphi, balomena, that's that one. Anti means against. Anti with an I means against. So these are spoken against. Anti with an E means before, but anti with an I means against. So this is where a little bit of Latin comes in. It helps you get a head start here. Sure. Actually, it's Greek before it's Latin. Sorry. Yeah, as I'm thinking about what I just said, Greek. Greek and Latin, either one would do.
So Dr. Grebe, is 2 Peter and 2 and 3 John, would that be anti or amphi?
I think they can be both. I think they might be both in Origen's list. I don't have it in front of me at the moment. If they're spoken against, that means somebody, Origin knew that somebody thought that was a problem to have them in the canon. And then as a result of that, they might be toss-ups. It's possible for them to be both.
Yeah, and that certainly could be reflected in the history from what we were talking about earlier with West versus all the different aspects of the Eastern Church.
That's right. I think the most important thing to remember about the process is what Luke Johnson says, it's reception that's the most important of the factors. In theory, it had to have a connection with an apostle, but the church was willing to overlook some things and even invent some things if necessary in order to get some books into the canon. So that's a tradition rather than a historical question. If it's traditionally related to Paul, like Luke, then it's going to get in because it's beautiful and it's powerful, and we want it there. And we can't. There wasn't a disciple named Luke. So what are we going to do? Well, it says that Luke is mentioned in Paul's letters, and so he gets in. Paul's an apostle. If you're in the, it's just that we have to have it's not crooked. It's just a different understanding of how things have authority than we have. And we just, if we expect the patristic fathers and mothers, mostly fathers, to play by our rules, they'll flunk. And of course, we'll flunk if it's the other goes the other way around too. So, yeah. Doctrinal test is a bit more objective, but even there, you've got bishops on different sides of different questions that are going to value some books more than others. So it's the bishops usually that had the lists of what books were okay to use in my diocese, what books are canon in my diocese, and it worked that way for a while, and then it got more organized.
Are you willing to remind us about fictive kinship?
I am willing. I am very willing. When Paul writes to Philemon and refers to the slave's name, I just blanked on.
Onesimus.
Onesimus, thank you. As his son, then he has become my child, my son, because I baptized him. And to our sister Apphia, our sister in Christ. She's not Paul's sister. Archippus, our brother. These are words that express the way that the early Christians thought of themselves as family, even though they weren't biologically related. They would call each other brother and sister. And for the same reason, they would exchange a holy kiss. The holy kiss is mentioned at the end of a couple of the letters that you've read. There's good. This is probably a very formal thing, but it would have been something that family members did. Good question. I'm sure there are more good questions out there.
So going back a step to the
Sure.
canon,
Uh-huh.
would the reason the Didache have been left out was because it was seen as too far removed from the apostles? Because otherwise its content seems pretty, it's not like the Apocalypse of Peter, which has some weird stuff, but I mean, it seems like it's pretty not all that different from some of the things that were included.
Yeah, and you'll remember that it was circulated in some canonical lists. It was, and even where it might have been just that it was from Syria and not widely recognized. So some of the specific rules about baptism and Eucharist, probably other people didn't want to follow those. So if it's canon, it has an additional weight. So what we have is a window into how the Syrian church at about 110 organized themselves and how they handled the question of wandering prophets, and how they thought the right way to do baptism and Eucharist were. That we can't generalize from that to say that's how it was done everywhere in all places. In fact, the fact that it didn't get into the canon makes me think that maybe there was a variety of liturgical practices, some of which would have been quite different from the Syrian ones, or that some of the things that are said on other topics are not were not welcome. It also has an apocalyptic section at the end, which may have hurt it, because Revelation had trouble getting into the canon. This is just speculation. I don't know. I'm just guessing with you. You shouldn't take this as history, because I don't have any inside information about this. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
So it's almost like if it's not apostolic origin, it already has one strike against it. And so then the question is,
depends on how much we need it. The problem is that that Christology in Hebrews, as some of you have discovered, is really incredibly powerful and beautiful, and we need it against Arians and against others who would have a much lower Christology. So we attribute it to Paul. And so it gets into the canon, but somebody somewhere knows, at least the church in Rome knows that Paul didn't write it. They probably knew who did write it and didn't remind people about who wrote it, because they agreed that it would be useful in debates in the early church. So it gets into the canon, but it doesn't get into the Pauline letters. But it's sort of has a Pauline flavor somewhere. So that counts as that's good enough. So these are political decisions, theological political decisions about what the church needs. So that's why I keep saying that the New Testament we have is the New Testament that the early church thought we needed. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, do we trust their judgment or not? And that's why I think Luke Johnson is at pains to say that this wasn't one judgment, one place, one time. This was a long considered judgment over many years, over centuries, in fact, and then ratified by all kinds of councils. So it wasn't done lightly, it wasn't done quickly, and it wasn't done by some power elite. Those are the places where moderns, or postmoderns, I don't know, I'm not sure we've ever made it out of modernity, frankly, but that's okay. Like us, are likely to go. We want to know about the process. And they were less worried about the process. They were more worried about the getting a collection of books for the use of Christians that would be what they really needed to read. Now we can second guess some of their judgments about that too. Do we really need Jude? I'm not sure. I'm not sure we really need Jude, but I say on the last day of class that all of the books of the Bible are useful if you can learn how to read them. So I have to say, to be consistent, I have to at least leave the door open that there are some socially redeeming points in Jude, and I'm going to try hard to find them. So does that help, or does it just sound stupid?
No, that does. And I mean, really,
Okay.
it's like there's 18 of us on the call right now, and I consider myself more like Jude. And I would consider, you more like Romans, or like, John or something like that. But we're all come from different paths, and we're all here together in this one unit here. Just like
Okay.
all the books are in the New Testament together, brought
Well,
forth.
I have argued that there are disagreements, but I don't think you're like Jude. So just for the record, but if you do or want to do that, that's fine with me, and I respect and honor that. And Jude is in the canon, so whether I'm wild about it or not, I had better take it seriously. It's not a forbidden book, Andrew. It's funny. Okay. It's short. Oh, that's crazy. Okay. Are there other terms that are puzzling or that you want me to say more about? A lot of these are not complicated, but for example, parakalo, did you find parakalo? Yeah, Justin did. Okay. And the main thing about temple is, I think I also listed synagogue. I want you to keep them separate. I want you to know the difference between the temple in Jerusalem and local synagogues. And I want you to remember, is synagogue still on here? I think I can't believe I left off synagogue.
Middle of column 2.
Thank you. I didn't leave off synagogue.
That's in
Remember when I was talking about James, that I said if a rich man comes into your synagogue or if a poor man does, in the New RSV and most recent translations translate congregation or church or something, obscuring therefore the fact that these early Christians would have called their congregation a synagogue. So that's just something that it's important for us to know. But the temple in Jerusalem, so many synagogues, one temple. Synagogues were places where study happened, where community events happened, very much like a local parish, where people spoke about things they cared about, where people studied and learned and taught and did other things. But the temple is a place in Jerusalem, only one of it, rebuilt by Herod the Great for the purpose of sacrificing animals.
Dr. Grebe, I just want to make sure I'm understanding Galatians right. The 3 times in 3 places pattern that you discussed, and we have Paul talking about there was the first time, and I want to make sure I have the 3 right. The first time was in Jerusalem with the false believers on circumcision. The second time is in Antioch with eating with the Gentiles. And the third was the present, what he was talking about, the situation there and with the Galatians. Is that correct?
And the teachers. So in each case, the pattern, I'm sure not everybody sees this pattern, but to me, it's just so clear. The storyline is everything was going along fine until this group shows up and wrecks it. And they're trying to do it again. And here are 2 other instances of that where, we went to Barnabas and I went up to Jerusalem taking with Barnabas and taking Titus with us. And we laid out what we were doing and they were loving it. It was fine. And we had it all, but there were false brothers hiding in the curtains and they nearly wrecked the whole thing. But we didn't give up into them for even a minute. Whatever happened to them, we did not let that happen. Preserving the truth of the gospel that would eventually come to you. In Antioch, Peter and Barnabas and all the Jewish Christians sat down at table with Gentile Christians. I think it was probably like a potluck. You ate what you liked and you didn't pay too much attention about what the person next to you was eating. They were following their conscience, you were following yours, and it was no problem. But as soon as some people from James, church in Jerusalem, came, all of a sudden Peter started getting nervous, and 2 steps. First, he pulls back, and then he sort of ritually separates himself from the group at the table. There are 2 different verbs that Paul uses there to explain what Paul considers his wimpiness. And even Barnabas, he says, was succumbed to this hypocrisy. And I was the only one. I defended the gospel there in Antioch, says Paul. I saved the day, you know. Well, you know, okay, he's telling the story. I would love to have been at Antioch that day, but at any rate, but now, you know, you Galatians, we had this thing going. Galatians, there's a lot of tender language in Paul's letter to the Galatians about their special relationship. So how can you be so stupid as to listen to these teachers who are telling you the opposite of what we told you? So that's the pattern. Yes, and you're right. I think we're supposed to see an overlap. We're supposed to see how the pattern works twice before and then apply it today. We Galatians, that is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. I'm happy to tell that. Did you get parousia? Anybody want help with parousia? Andrew, you do. Okay. Parousia is the kind of bold speech. And we talked about it twice. Once we talked about it because it's used in Acts to describe the disciples who will not be silenced. The authorities tell them, go home, stop talking about Jesus. And they say, sorry, we have to obey God rather than people. And we're going to keep talking about Jesus. And here's something else about Jesus that you'd like to hear. So that kind of boldness that stands up to the authorities. But there's another boldness that has to do with friendship literature. A friend is someone who can say what nobody else will say to you and get away with it because you know it comes from a place of love. So there's a boldness in friendship that's one of the things that characterizes friendship. There are probably other things to say about it too, but at least those two. So. Well, we may be done.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Yeah, sure. With the last essay question, the ecclesiology question. And I just want to make sure I'm not overthinking this. So it's talking about choosing one example of a denomination or tradition and show how Brown's argument works for that group. It's really just kind of working through the way he sets it up is like, what are the ways that this works, but also what are the ways that this can go too far if you overemphasize one. So we're just supposed to take one denomination and really kind of lean into that. We're not following the weaknesses or the strengths across different denominations. Is that right?
That's right. I want you to show to talk about the parts of the New Testament that are most important to that group or tradition, and maybe speculate about why those are the most important parts, and then I mentioned particularly polity and practices. So you might think polity is how a church is organized.
Yeah.
Right? Practices could be either ethical practices or liturgical practices. Maybe some other communal practices or so. So it depending on which tradition or denomination you pick, you'll be able to say something about how they glom onto some part of the New Testament as being more important. What's their canon within the canon that they consciously or unconsciously choose to give more attention to.
So would that be like Assemblies of God and the spiritual gifts?
It could very well be. I think you could make a case for that in the Pentecostal tradition, or for that matter, the Holy Spirit in the Pentecostal. So I'm not sure I know as much about the Assemblies of God as you do. So you might have to explain in that essay question why you're saying what you're saying. So give examples or something that would show me that you've thought about this group some. And then talk also I think Brown assumes, and I agree with him, that in many cases, the opposite of a virtue is a liability. That our greatest strengths sometimes also contribute to our greatest weaknesses. So one of the examples I sometimes use is segregation shifting to integration in the Deep South. The Roman Catholic Church is integrated overnight. There was a papal decree, and it was enforced in every parish by the local clergy, and the church is integrated the next Sunday. And because our polity is very different, we had a very different experience with that. And the Baptist churches, because their polity is different, had another very different experience with that. Every congregation made its own decision about that. For us, we had to work it through General Convention and diocese by diocese and stuff like that, because we have dioceses and we have a General Convention. So, I mean, that's one example, but you could pick any kind of thing you wanted to talk about. I'm giving you lots of latitude.
Dr. Grebe, is it okay if we want to choose a denomination that we are a part of?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I didn't know if it was like hands off your own denomination.
No, I thought about doing that, but then I decided not to. As long as you're willing to talk about both strengths and challenges.
Mm-hmm.
The point is to be able to see that there are some for every denomination or tradition. There are gifts. There's a theology in ecumenism about a theology of gifts. Everybody has gifts to bring towards the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And then we all bring things that complicate the oneness of the church for others. And we need to be able to talk about those and know what they are. We need to know the places where our tradition is offensive.
Mm-hmm.
Heard Christopher Morse, no, not Christopher, who gave the lecture on the consortium lecture. He's team teaching with Dean Markham in ethics. It is Christopher.
Dr. Norris.
Norris, thank you. And not Morse, but Norris, Christopher Norris. He's a Baptist, and he could not let the evening go by without reminding us that and also again in his sermon, I think, last week, could not let the evening go by without making some comment about the right and wrong ways to do baptism. And because it's offensive, what we do. And so he needed to weigh in on that in order to have integrity, I think, and I didn't ask him, I'm guessing. He felt as he needed to say something about that in order to have integrity and defend his own tradition somewhat. So you're going to run into things like that in the parish. And that's why I want you to be thinking about it ahead of time, about how to, a model that you can use to think about this. And I think Brown's is very good. That's why I keep assigning this book. I think I want you to be able to be graceful and also when you're welcoming, no, we didn't, Andrew. Welcoming to people who come from other traditions and have some idea of what kind of stereotypes they're going to have about ours, and what kind of where are the logical building blocks where you can reach out to somebody and say, we have this in common and this in common and this in common. So that's what this question is meant to do. Okay. Yeah. Andrew, what was the word you were asking about? Andrew Lazo?
The apologetic letter?
Yes. It's a form that is sometimes attributed to 2 Corinthians. And so this is a good time to talk for a minute about ancient rhetorical, how to write a letter schools, because some of us, this is generational. Some of us grew up in elementary school learning about different kinds of letters. We learned how to write a thank you letter. We learned how to write a business letter. You don't use to my dear wonderful grandmother language on you dear sir or madam when you're writing to a corporation about your lost widgets or something. So you learned these conventions about writing letters that are used in different contexts and different circumstances. If you're writing a protest letter, a letter to the editor, you're going to use a different way of thinking about it than if you're I don't know, writing a letter of recommendation for somebody. They're all different kinds of letter forms. And there were manuals about this. One of the most famous was by Quintilian. And so they characterized and gave names to all the different types of letters that you could write. And modern scholars about Paul especially, but about other New Testament texts did I hear the word way overboard a little while ago? Yes, they assume something like Paul sat down and said, well, let's see, am I going to write a commendatory letter? Am I going to write an apologetic letter? I'm going to write, he's just writing a letter. And it's later scholars that decide whether it's an apologetic letter or a paranetic letter or a combination of something. So you need to be smart about that. You just need to recognize that that just because there are handbooks about how to write letters that people would have known, that doesn't mean that we need to worry very much about what kind of letter Paul is writing. But there is such a thing as an apologetic letter, and it has been applied to 2 Corinthians, and you can see why.
Dr. Grieb, I just can't let the Christopher Norris comment go by without letting people know that my home church in Minnesota baptizes people in lakes in the summer.
Like a lot of churches do. The Episcopal churches, there are churches that by the seaside, they know what to do with the seaside. And there are Episcopal churches that have tanks. And there are Episcopal churches that have fonts that look like bathtubs, only they're much prettier. There's one in the cathedral at Philadelphia. You could definitely be immersed in that. So, but thank you, Kay. Yeah. Okay, that might be a good note to end on. So one more time, I will say, may the 4th be with you. And don't obsess about this. Don't stress about this. It's just an exam. And it'll all be over soon, and you'll have a beautiful, glorious summer out in front of you. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your goodwill. And